Good morning.
Good morning, Omaha, America.
Okay.
Haven't you heard?
You're waking up in Lincoln, so we'll just say Nebraska, America.
Well, that worked. It wasn't. It had nothing to do with me being in Lincoln. I just I hadn't heard Omaha, America in a while, so
Okay.
was exclaiming about that.
You know where I took that from? The late Adrian Fiala, when he would do his monologue at the beginning of the radio broadcast, when he was the analyst, he would say, "From Lincoln, America," and I thought that's unique.
Yeah, I like it.
Anytown,
I
USA.
might steal it.
No. You were at North Central last night with Matt Rhule and Terrence Knighton. You guys drove separately. What stood out in your observations of a lot of talent, a lot of young talent on both sidelines?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start with this, and I sent you the text last night. Darian Jones, who I had been told about the week before when I ran into Steve Warren in Columbus watching his son Braylon Warren play. You know, his older brother Donovan Jones was a Warren Academy guy that Nebraska offered at their Friday Night Lights camp in 2023, and he was kind of, I don't want to say plucked from obscurity, but a little bit plucked from obscurity. I didn't know much about Donovan Jones at all, and then I left the year thinking he was easily one of the top players in the state, one of the more effortless athletes that I've seen. That can play defensive back and wide receiver, two positions that the state of Nebraska doesn't always produce at a super high level. And then here's his younger brother, Darian Jones, who had two touchdowns last night that combined for 100 yards. He had more than 100 yards receiving. He looks like he glides when he runs. I mean, in a game full of really talented players that features a guy in Torrey Pittman that is, a top 20 player in the country by 24/7 Sports for the 2027 class. Kylan Haney, who has people dreaming of the old Omaha Central running back pipeline. You had Tyson Terry, who was just terrorizing players, and is the primary reason that Matt Rhule was there on Thursday night. And yet Darian Jones was the guy that kind of stole the show for me. I mean, he was fantastic. And some of it, sometimes you get really locked in when you didn't know of someone. I had seen all of those other guys before. But Darian was terrific. Like I said, he had the two touchdowns. He's a very fluid, smooth athlete. But yeah, I mean, all those other guys I mentioned all showed out. I mean, Torrey Pittman had an exceptional interception. Kylan Haney finished with a touchdown run. He had a big run to start the game. Kind of struggle there for Central in between. And then Tyson Terry was sort of dominant throughout. I mean, and I'm sure there's other people on this. Max Clark is a linebacker I know Nebraska's keeping an eye on. He was visible throughout. There's a lot of talent in that game. It was a choppy, kind of ugly game for much of it, but a lot of individual talent on the field last night.
Schaef, the younger players, you're pointing out some of them, and then when you look at some of the other high schools that have sophomores or juniors that are starting to make their mark and get noticed, especially in the skill position, or if we're talking about defensive backs too, I know there's going to be physically room for them to grow, but is it when they look ready-made? What jumps out? Is it just the twitchiness, the speed, just the overall skill? What has jumped out to you when you see a lot of these younger players?
I mean, I think a lot of it to me is just how well trained some of them are as athletes already. I think it speaks to having places like Warren Academy and all the different personal trainers around Omaha and the other communities. And sometimes you would see Nebraska take a guy just based off of their raw ability. And some of these guys have tremendous raw ability, but they're also really instinctual or smart football players that you can tell are, not just getting by off of just being a better athlete than who's lining up across from them, but they've learned how to use some of that athleticism. They've taken some of the stuff away from the various Huskers that have hung around in the communities, or former Huskers, I should say, that have hung around in the communities and now are teaching and letting these guys know what to look for and what to do. I mean, in the case of Darian Jones, who, like I said, I keep kind of raving about, a lot of it was just the effortless athleticism. He would catch the ball, and his first step was so fast, like right after catching it, he had two Central defenders colliding as they were trying to converge on tackling. I mean, he was gliding on the field last night. I mean, and some of that you can't teach. That's just raw athleticism. And there's a lot of it in Nebraska that maybe goes unnoticed a little bit. And so I look at what Matt Rhule has in front of him for 2026, 2027, 2028, and beyond. And I think they're pretty excited about what's here locally, in addition to what they're going to have to go get nationally. The disappointing thing, and there's a couple guys I didn't mention, but I think without the 105-man limit, Nebraska might have pushed really hard to walk on, and not necessarily a blue shirt fashion, but to walk on and see if they could eventually be scholarship guys. Ike Ackerman and Elijah Wayne are two guys that I think Nebraska's coaching staff likes a lot. They can't necessarily pull the trigger on offers. They have deep defensive line rooms as it is.
Mm-hmm.
But those are two guys that wouldn't shock me if they just happened to show up at Nebraska's postgraduate camp in a year or two and sort of found their way back. I mean, they go on somewhere else and they're really successful. Elijah Wayne's committed to South Dakota State, and Ackerman's committed to Northwest Missouri. But those are good players too. There's a lot of good football happening, or good football development happening in the state of Nebraska that the big program is going to benefit from when they get their opportunity to put their hands on some of these guys.
Yeah, I'm a big Isaac Ackerman fan. He had a monster night last night.
He punted the ball. I don't know if you could see this in the broadcast. There was a bad snap. The ball's rolling away. It's by Central's goal line.
At the 2-yard line.
He picks it up. This is right in front of Matt Rhule, who I think was as stunned by this as he was the Torrey Pittman interception. He picks it up and punts it left-footed. He's right-footed. Punts it left-footed while people are bearing down on him. He even had to roll a little bit to the left. And he still kicks it like 40 yards.
Holy hell.
With a good spiral on the punt.
Jesus.
And then the next punt that he has, he drops at the 2-yard line and just booms it. I mean, this is a guy that's a 6'4", effortless dunker. He's a defensive end by trade, could play tight end. He's just a freak athlete. There's a reason Nebraska was super enamored of Ike Ackerman.
Christian Jones, you've written and talked about his commitment. It came through earlier this week. Him committing, and he wanted to see Nebraska up close. They made Colorado tap out, and he said, I want to be part of that. I think we all then go, okay, what's next? Is this a start of what Saturday night could bring with the amount of prospects that they had here? What is next now after Christian Jones is part of the mix?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the last big in-state guy for 2025. And so I think it kind of the ball moves forward to 2026. And for me, Jace Reynolds comes to mind at Elkhorn North. And then I tweeted about this yesterday, or I think it was yesterday. It might have been 2 days ago. I think the best player in the state for 2026 is Isaac Jensen. And I think Isaac Jensen is every bit as good as all these other great tight ends that are now playing Power 4 football throughout the college football landscape. Like I think Isaac Jensen's right there with Thomas Fedoni and Carter Nelson and Ben Bramer and his own teammate who's a senior going to Florida State next year, and Chase Lofton. The McIntyre kid who went to Oklahoma, and Cade Helms. Like, Nebraska's had so many good tight ends. And I think Isaac Jensen is every bit as good, and maybe even in some ways better than some of those guys. He is going to be a massive target, I think, for Nebraska in 2026. They have a deep tight end room, but they want to keep adding that talent to it. And I think he's one of those guys that you want to walk away with. And so you have him. And then there's a bunch of players in the Metro that they're keeping their eye on, to kind of see how things move forward. They don't have as many offers out in the 2026 class as they maybe even do in 2027, or what they're keeping their eye on beyond that. But I think that we could see some late season offers based off of some film for some of these juniors.
Chase Lofton, we know, is committed to Florida State, but is that something to continue to keep your eye on, that Nebraska tries to get back in the mix, or is already back in the mix?
I mean, I think that it's always kind of a, hey, if Nebraska rips off 7 straight wins before they head to Ohio State, you're going to keep that phone line open. I don't know that Chase Lofton necessarily looks at the 0-2 start at Florida State and thinks, well, I got to see what my opportunities are in Nebraska. Sure. And I don't know Nebraska looks at it like, hey, we have to take him, because like I said, they have a deep tight end room. I think Chase Lofton's really good. He's proven it every night with Millard South. That move might be something that took a really good Millard South team and made it great. It's certainly worth watching. I talked to Chase briefly last week before the Colorado game. He said he wasn't visiting Nebraska. He didn't really give an indication that he's been talking a lot with Nebraska. I think there's just a chance he goes to Florida State and everything plays out as it is currently.
2 games into his career, Dylan Raiola, Schaef, is he making the situation a better situation on offense, or is the situation that he came into making him a better quarterback through just 2 games?
I think it's got to be both, but I think he enhances Nebraska's ability to play a certain style of football. I mean, they want to play through their defense. I don't think there's any real shock with that, but they also want an offense that can be dangerous too. I mean, you have that video or the comment from Matt Rhule where, they feel like their wide receivers, their passing game could murder. You don't really say that unless you feel like you've got the ability with both the wide receiver and the quarterback to really be dynamic there. They haven't shown that yet, but that doesn't mean it isn't possible in the arsenal, or that, as you said, he's played 2 games. Sometimes it feels like Dylan Raiola has been here forever, but he's only played 2 games. I mean, the best is definitely yet to come with him. But what we've already seen is someone who can drive the vehicle. He can parallel park. He can get you in and out of tight situations. He can make the right reads at the right time. I mean, he's doing a really nice job, to keep the car analogy going, keeping you on the road and letting the defense, kind of dictate the terms of the entire game. I think that's going to happen again this weekend. I think Nebraska's defense is going to have a really nice game against a kind of bad offensive FCS team. And so, the opportunity there is for Nebraska to pile up a bunch of points offensively. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them kind of focus on the running game a little bit. And, I don't look for them to just score 77 points like they're Indiana playing Western Illinois. So it's an interesting situation because I keep coming out of how Nebraska looks right now like they'd be the best version of a Big Ten West football team that we've seen in a long time. Before people scoff at that, Iowa went undefeated. That was probably your best version of a Big Ten West team in 2015. I think Nebraska can absolutely be that. Now, can that translate to wins against USC and Ohio State? And can you avoid the bumps in the road? That remains to be seen.
Is this a game, Schaef, that we go from Dylan Raiola, the good decision maker, dare I even say the game manager, to, okay, now that next step is a little bit more the playmaker? And I'm not talking about all of a sudden he's just taking off freelancing with his legs, but being able to let it loose a little bit. And do you think he'll have that opportunity to do that?
I think that's twofold. I think the coaching staff would tell you he's had that opportunity and guys haven't come up with catches. You've had Isaiah Nair drop the ball on the end zone line. Jalen Lloyd is right off the fingertips in that Colorado game. It's a good ball to Thomas Fidone when there's pass interference. So it's not that he hasn't thrown it downfield. It just hasn't resulted necessarily in the completion for whatever reason. But I think the coaching staff would tell you that's there. Like they're not reining that in necessarily. Now, second half, they didn't look to go downfield. They very much, I felt like, wanted to limit the exposure that Dylan Raiola was going to have in terms of hits and everything else. And so they just wanted to get that game over with. And so I think they kept a lot of things around the line of scrimmage, obviously ran the ball a little bit there. So I don't know that this is the game where you're going to see it, but maybe that Illinois game. That's a good defense. That's when you're probably going to need a little extra. That's the best defensive team Nebraska will have played in the first 4 weeks. So I look at next Friday as if you want sort of the full Dylan Raiola arrival, that first Big Ten game, which could have 2 ranked teams on it on a Friday night in Memorial Stadium, another night atmosphere. I mean, that might be where you really get to see what this kid is.
If Nebraska does Nebraska tomorrow night, what's the score look like?
I don't think they're just going to blow them out because I think in some ways, I think Nebraska is going to shorten the games themselves. So I have a shutout. First shutout since 2009. Last shutout was the Holiday Bowl against Arizona. I have Nebraska winning 38-0. And a very workmanlike, almost boring performance in a way, which is hard to imagine a shutout being boring. But I just don't. I'm not looking for them to just go win this game 56-7 or whatever, right? I think it'll be a workmanlike opportunity for them to get better in different ways. And and just get off the field with no injuries. I think that's the goal this weekend.
That'd be a lot better than your simulation, man. Come on, you need to step
Yeah,
it up.
well,
man, you guys,
Look,
jeez.
FCS Northwest
Yeah.
really gave Dylan Raiola a problem. Virtual Dylan Raiola has not been as clean as real Dylan Raiola. What are we doing, EA?
Well, they were throwing the ball out more than I think Northern Iowa will, but yeah, man.
I think Northern Iowa is going to have to throw, and I think they're going to find that to be a difficult challenge.
I agree. Schaef, thanks. Good seeing you last night. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
That's Mike Schaefer.